Ransomware, as far as I'm aware, is basically a locking up of files upon the network. But does this also make ransomware a data breach, or how does that exactly fit in?
Chris, this is a great question, and I think we need to preface this by saying we are not lawyers, right?
That's right.
We are not lawyers. And a data breach is a legal term.
Okay.
It is something that's defined by your state government or in some cases by the federal government. But I can tell you that the Office of Civil Rights, which is responsible for administering HIPAA, for healthcare organizations, they have said that specifically that ransomware is presumed to be a breach. If someone has gone and rifled through your cabinet and your file cabinet and somehow locked up all the files in your file cabinet, it would still be a little creepy that someone has rifled through your file cabinet, right? Okay. So the Office of Civil Rights has said that you have to presume that ransomware, like any kind of malware, is a breach unless you have evidence that shows there is a low probability that patient health information has been compromised.
Okay.
So that's part of why it's so important to have network monitoring in place and to have evidence that data has not been compromised, because otherwise you have to presume that it is.
And speaking of that, Sherry, one of the things that's so important is when you run into ransomware, as an IT person, your first response is, okay, we have to get rid of it. We want it off of there. We don't want it on our network. So you certainly remove it from your network. But a lot of times the next step is to go ahead and re-image that machine. And in the situation where you're going to have to prove whether or not there was a breach, you really want to preserve that as evidence. So, don't write over the hard drive. Get a new hard drive, re-image the machine that way, but save that other hard drive or save any evidence you can from your network, your servers, any log files that you have, so that if there is a question, you have that information to go back and look at.
Karen, have you seen any cases where it was a problem that evidence was wiped by like an IT person restoring a system?
Oh, absolutely, and because evidence that the attacker may have had control or how they got into the network may play into whether or not this is going to be defined as a data breach by the attorneys. And if that information is gone, then they are required to presume the worst. I mean, if you can't prove that it wasn't breached, then it's going to be presumed that they did have control of your data.
That makes sense. And unfortunately, it's not, our standard IT training is get it back up and running, get it back up and running, get it back up and running, restore from backups. So when a ransomware incident happens, you have to figure out if it's a data breach. And it's important to understand that's not IT's job. That is maybe not even management's job. It's a really smart idea to talk to an attorney outside your organization and present them with that information and get the attorney to make the call, because it really is a legal question.
Absolutely. So obviously during a ransomware attack, all departments are affected usually, so there's a lot of non-IT specific people who will be encountering things, but maybe want to know a little more about how to respond to something. Is there something that's not quite as intensive as, let's say, a DFR, a digital first responder course, that either a company can do or send some people to so that they can basically understand what in the moment, how all departments should respond in an easier way that's maybe not so technical?
I'll take that. We do tabletop exercises with companies, and this is a great way for them to practice their plan.
Okay.
As I mentioned earlier, if you don't have a plan, you're already way behind. But this is an opportunity to practice, and so you gather all of the people in one place, whether it's the CEO, legal counsel, communications, human resources, and of course your IT staff. And this is an opportunity for them to understand, oh wow, we have a plan for what happens if we get ransomware on the network. And it's something that we have a lot of fun with, because then as we go through the exercise, we throw out little red herrings sometimes. Sure. We also throw out surprise. By the way, you're also infected with this one. And those are great ways to practice what you're doing.
Sure. Yeah. And that doesn't necessarily have to happen in person either. Is that something like
Correct.
A company could do remotely or on a sort of a conference or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. We've done a number of them remotely and using services like Skype. There's a number of ways to do that type of an exercise, but it's really meant to allow the company to walk through an incident while reviewing their plan and make sure that every step they're taking is appropriate.
Okay, excellent. So kind of in review of what we covered as far as response, setting up a hotline that everyone has access to easily if they happen to notice something going wrong. Think about training your first responders. Develop a plan, probably first and foremost, so that you do know what's happening.
Yes, and along those lines, I mean, we've talked about the fact that ransomware goes well beyond IT. It's something that can affect finance and accounting and HR and really every department. It can affect your critical business operations, whether you manufacture widgets or you serve patients. So ransomware needs to be included in your crisis management planning at an organizational level. And who needs to be involved in that?
Well, first of all, make sure your public relations person is
yes.
involved.
Crisis communications is very important.
You always want them on board. You also want legal counsel, of course, because there are going to be questions that have to be answered. And the interesting thing is oftentimes crisis planning happens outside of the IT function, and I often find that IT is not included. IT needs to be included in any type of crisis management plan, whether it's what to do in the event of a weather incident, or how the company would navigate the waters of having some sort of a lawsuit filed against them. It doesn't seem obvious, but it should be. IT needs to be involved because they are going to be affected by whatever crisis is happening.
Well, I know you used to be the director of technology for a large school district, and weren't you the emergency voice?
I was. Yes.
Who else puts out the announcement?
Right.
IT.
Yes, I was the voice that the parents heard when bomb threats were called into schools. I called the parents and said, we've had a bomb threat, everyone is fine, here's where the kids are, here's how you can pick them up. And I became known as the voice, primarily because I was the only one who knew how to run the system.
Right. So that's often a role of IT.
It is.
But when you're doing your crisis communications planning, your executive team needs to buy into it. You don't want to have conflicts in the heat of a moment. Everyone needs to buy in on it. And the plan is not something that should be created at an IT level. It's something that everybody needs to be involved with. We often see that cyber insurance has been purchased by a company, and IT has no idea what it covers or how to activate it. And so that's another area, and we could probably go into more depth on this another day, but that really comes into play in ransomware cases because there is coverage in insurance policies for cyber extortion. And yet your IT folks need to know what triggers that coverage. At what point do they call the insurer? And when you call an insurer, the insurer may assign you an attorney or may suggest that you work with a particular forensics firm, or they may have other suggestions. They may have crisis communications folks on the line. And the time to have those conversations, those initial conversations, and get to know your insurer and their processes is not when a ransomware incident happens. It's beforehand. You should have those conversations really when you're signing the contract and shortly afterwards.
And I think there was a name for the position that you shared with me just a few weeks ago that I hadn't heard, but it's so true. It's insurance companies can put you in touch with a data breach coach. And this is not to tell you how to breach data. This is to coach. This is to coach you through if you've had a data breach, and really to help you understand what are those steps you need to take, and what triggers them, and how do you get through, because you look at some of the larger data breaches. Home Depot, for example, set up a hotline for people to call if they had questions, and that's not something that you may think of immediately, but a data breach coach who's been through this with other companies is going to suggest that for you.
And they might already have a company arranged to do that.
Yes.
So the short answer is yes, ransomware can be a data breach, and so you need to be prepared to handle it accordingly and have all of your crisis management plans set up to handle it in that way.
Excellent. Well, I think that was a great conversation about proper response. Is there anything else that you two would like to touch on today?
Nope. I'd just like to let the audience know, take a look at the pyramid. Of course,
Absolutely.
Let us know if you have any questions.
Yes,
Check out the videos.
you can find our overview of the pyramid in our previous video, and we'll be continuing to put out discussions on ransomware and ways to respond to that, as well as reducing your risk and making sure your backups are put together. Here at LMG, we say that a great day in cybersecurity is a day when nothing happens. So thank you for watching the Achieve Nothing web series, and find us on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, YouTube as lmgsecurity.com, and we'll see you next time.